Baba, everyone. It so happens that I'm giving another talk on the kick and the kiss. And Baba did say, that the kick and the kiss come together. And it's sort of a really interesting phenomenon. I thought I would devote my talk to that. I'm sure there's anyone here can say they've had a kick from Baba and a kiss from Baba, or if you've only had a kiss, then the kick will come. Or if you've had the kick, then the kiss will come. And they often come together, which is quite an interesting phenomenon. And I've really experienced that in very odd ways. And one reason is the energy that Baba uses and speeds up your karma, you see, and you have positive and negative karma. So if he's speeding up the good karma coming to you, then the bad karma comes. So it comes actually because of the wave motion of karma. The sea of samsara, the sea of sanskaras, is in constant motion. Your sanskaras, everyone's sanskaras, the world's sanskaras, we're in an ocean together, and you really can't get out of it till you realize. So you're in constant motion, and your sanskaras are in constant motion. I always tell people you cannot stand still. You have a tendency to want to just get out of it and stand still. But there's no such thing in nature. As the Buddha says, the only thing that's constant is change until you get out of sanskara, the world of sanskara. And there's a beautiful image always in Buddhism that he is the boat that carries you, the master is the boat that carries you across the ocean. And once you're on the other side, then you don't need the boat, or you become a boat if you're one of those lucky ones, 5 perfect masters that stick around. So it's the law of action and reaction. But naturally, we all want the positive, the kiss, and we don't want the kick. So it's very important to understand that both are important. And they're both part of Baba's method to deal with you, to get rid of sanskaras. Why does he give you the kiss? Because you need a little boost. You need a little sweetmeat. You need a little prasad. You need a little blessing. You need a little sweetener on life. Life's cereal, whatever it is. And then he sprinkles the pepper over there, it's sugar and pepper or something. And you see, here's the kiss, but I won't show you where the kick is. And actually, when I first met Bob in Myrtle Beach, he beckoned to me one day and just kind of went a little aside, and I was to kiss him there. Now in those days we wore very horrible red lipstick. This was the 50s. So I left this print of lipstick on Bob, and I felt so funny about that, because he's so pure. Here's a lip. But anyway, he gave me a chance actually to give him a kiss. And that's pretty incredible, I think. I'm sure he took sanskaras that way, in that gentle way. Another time, he used to give me his laundry to wash. But that was a privilege. I'd get this, quote, dirty laundry from Bob, and it would smell so heavenly that I'd take it around and say, smell for other people. And one of my little projects is to make a perfume called Avatar. I was going to do it for this Sabbath, but we didn't quite get it finished, Karina and I. But, the perfect masters in the Avatar never have any body odor. They say Baba Jan had the odor of violets around her all the time. So why is it we get the kisses to boost you up? And the kick is important too, because that kicks apart your sense spheres. When you kick something, you break it up. And that is why it's necessary. And there's some classic stories. I think the story of Meredith Starr is probably a real archetype of Baba's work. This man was a very interesting man, as Margaret said the other day. He played a very important role. He was the one that was the link in England for Baba's first contact with the West, and all these people had gathered at Devonshire in the retreat there that he ran. And when Baba first came, he was like the interpreter, real important. Everyone's, he introduced to Baba, and Baba gave him the job of giving out information about him and so on, and meeting the press and everything. But then along comes Malcolm Schloss, who also was a poet, Meredith Starr wrote lovely poetry. And on the trip to America, with Meredith coming and Malcolm on the boat, suddenly Baba switched and gave Malcolm the job. Said, you are the one to meet the press, you see, when he arrives in New York Harbor. And that was a big puncture wound to Meredith Starr's ego. You see, he'd been boosted up as the main one, and then dropped flat. And for him it was pretty tough, and that sort of started where he drifted away from Baba. But Baba does that really basically to all of us one time or another. And I saw other people go through that. I went through that. Baba will make a fuss over you, and then suddenly you're ignored. The story of 3B Dimple is sort of like that. When we arrived in San Francisco in '56, the whole gang of us that traveled with him. They're waiting for Bob outside the glass door of the airport. It was a whole crew of kids. It was the Sufis who had kids in those days. Not too many kids. And there was this one girl, I guess she was 12, with long blonde hair, 3B Dimple. And Baba said, now all the children have me, you don't have me. So that was kind of sweet. And she just attached herself to Baba, and Baba made a real pet of her, real special. She was allowed to be with Baba, go around with him, and all that sort of thing. But then that was '56, and then comes '58 Darshan, Myrtle Beach. She's already 2 years older, and at that teenage time you change a great deal. But she had thought that she was in that spot again, you see. And Baba played with her. He would, call her in, and then he'd chuck her out, and then she would come in as if she had that privilege still. And Baba said, no. And it fell to Adele and I to kind of, make her shape up, quote unquote. But for her, it was like up and down, and people have gone through that with Baba now. That was in his personal presence and personal one-to-one action with him, but he's still doing that. He does that to your karma. And so you have to understand, I know many of you, we talk about the honeymoon with Baba, and then suddenly, boom, everything hits you. And they have that classic idea in the story of the path and other esoteric teachings that you have the razor's edge, it goes, straight through, and there's a positive and a negative, and you get a little of this, and suddenly there's that. And the dweller on the threshold is another way they explain it, like you're entering the first door on the path, and it beckons you, it's wonderful, you see this wonderful golden door to God, and you step up on that threshold, attracted by that, and then you get wanged and whacked and tested. The forces of Maya try to keep you away. And Baba says that Maya helps my work, and that the negative helps. Use the expression of a ball bouncing against a wall. When you practice your throws, you have to have something that'll bounce it back. And that's the force of Maya that Baba needs for his work. And he would always warn, we had many messages from India, the next 6 months will be very difficult, I warned my lovers. Maya, the showman, will be very powerful and all that. And we'd all go, whoa, what's going to happen next? And true enough, things might speed up. Now, it depends on where you're at in your particular karma. Baba made a statement about the new age that we're in, the Advent, time of the Advent, that I have to use my own language because I can't quote it exactly, but like he creates a huge wave in the ocean that was maybe a little calmer in between his comings. And so you could be, if your karma was more good sanskaras than bad, at the top of the wave. If you have more bad sanskaras, you may be down at the bottom. You know, a wave really goes in one direction. It stays in the same place, you know, wave theory, but it goes around and around. So you're up, and then you're down, you're up, and then you're down. But you're still going, you know, in the same direction. And that's the way your sanskaras unwind and wind. They're going in the same direction. And so Baba's giving this huge wave motion, this sumi, or whatever the Japanese call it. And depending on your karma, you may have a great deal of bliss during his advent. And some people, a great deal of suffering. There's a great deal of more suffering during the advent of the avatar. For masses of humanity, that's where the karma is. But there's also more bliss. Just think of all those musts. You know, maybe there are more of them. Or they get more bliss, or they get moved on from plane to plane. And Baba was most interestingly to me working with the musts during the years of the greatest suffering, which is the Second World War, in which he was active during the 40s. You see, with all those must tours and contacts that we saw last night. He's contacting the top of the wave, and that obviously influenced the bottom of the wave. And so he's working on bliss, suffering. And I think most of us who follow Baba get that intensified, condensed push up and down from Baba. That's why we have always some crises in the Baba world. And some wonderful things happening. People have blissful experiences, and then the next minute they have a broken leg or something. And I did experience that. The most intense inward bliss that I got from Baba was exactly the same moment when I busted my hip and had constant pain. So, you know, pretty weird. Or just a small example, you know, I just had this 70th birthday party, which was really kind of a love-in, you know. But the day before, I get a call from somebody who called me a friggin' bitch, that, you know. And just before this Sabbath, somebody, you know, more or less bawled me out. And, you know, I take it as normal, you know. Or one time, the only time I was actually paid to give a talk on Baba, the University of Redlands. They were very sweet. It was a beautiful hall, lovely audience, everything. And I had movies to show of Baba. I tested that blankety-blank projector about 50 times to get up on stage. It wouldn't work. So I asked for help from the audience, and luckily there was some boy there who came and miraculously fixed it while the audience waited. But I mean, you know, you're up there, it's just, you know, like this. And it's just amusing in a way. So after a while, you get used to it and understand why Baba's giving you this suffering. I've tackled the biggest question of all. Pretty brave. Anyway, in 1956, Ivy Deuce had arranged for a TV interview for Baba in Myrtle Beach, and everything went wrong. And we were sitting in the barn with Baba. It was raining, it was pouring, and the TV cameramen were supposed to be there already in the morning. It was already 5 in the afternoon, and Baba was going like this, and you know. And of course, we had a wonderful time. We were sitting there with Baba, but he'd send Ivy Deuce out into the pouring rain, and Dawn, I think, too, to see if they'd come, you know, go down to the gatehouse. Finally, they arrived, these huge cameramen, you know, these TV people always, they're carrying some camera this big, and they looked so exhausted. The weather had been so bad that nobody would fly them from Washington to Myrtle Beach, and one of her Sufi boys who had been a pilot in the war had to rent a plane and bring them through all the terrible thunderstorms, you know. So the movie wasn't taken that day, but the next day dawned beautiful and clear, and we all sat around the circle while Baba sat on that little ramp facing the lake. And Ivy asked him this question. This show never appeared on TV for various reasons, but this is what was taped. Ivy Deuce. Why should misery perpetually exist on earth in spite of God's infinite love and mercy? Baba. The source of eternal bliss is the self in all. The cause of perpetual misery is the selfishness of all. As long as satisfaction is derived through selfish pursuits, misery will always exist. Only because of the infinite love and mercy of God can man learn to realize, through the lessons of misery on earth, that inherent in him is the source of infinite bliss, and that all suffering is his labor of love to unveil his own infinite self. That was what Baba answered to the question that, theologians have struggled with forever. Why is there evil? Or they call it evil, but misery and unhappiness, suffering in the world. And Baba says that it is necessary, and even says somewhere, another sentence that impressed me very much, great suffering means great liberation. That was one thing that Baba said. He said also that God is with those who suffer the most. He's there with them. Here's another message. This hasn't been published, but it's interesting. Whosoever loves Baba, he suffers, because in that barbadi, or total ruin, emerges the real abadi, thrill of prosperity. Clarifying the importance of what Baba had said, he further explained that the man of the world, with average means of comforts, feels himself apparently having a stable stand on the earth, but he is quite ignorant that this so-called comfortable stand of his drags him down more and more, as if he were standing on the surface of quicksand or mire. That is how we find in the world a man of the world, apparently comfortable, seeks more comforts, and there is no end to his seeking and stabilizing his position. But in order to have a permanent stand, it is absolutely necessary that his apparent stand be totally removed, his apparent comfortable environment be withdrawn. It is invariably found in the case of lovers of God that they have no place or environment which they can correctly claim as their own. For the sake of the overwhelming love of their master, his lovers are unmindful of calamities and sufferings. Their whole stand on this earth is completely shaken to such an extent that they have nothing left to cling to but the love for their beloved master. They seem to be like the dust particles floating in the air. Ultimately, as soon as love for the master is established, that love places them on a rock-like foundation. The lover finds himself established on a rock, with unshakable faith in the master, and he no longer craves for the apparent comforts and position which would have otherwise dragged him to destruction. That was a message given in Andhra, 1954. And there's that wonderful story of Padre who was told by Baba to send a message to Meherzad if rain fell, and rain didn't fall day after day, but then one day the rain did fall on Meherbad. So he sent this kind of joyful message, yes, the rain fell on Meherbad. Baba gets the message, and he sends back a message, why be so joyous about the rain, This means total, for you, Padre, total ruin. Everything will be smashed. Everything will go, And what does Padre do? Oh, he's so happy. Baba told him everything about his life would be smashed a bit. That's the difference maybe between you and I and Padre. He'd gotten to that point where for the master to tell absolute ruin for him was wonderful. And, you know, the passing of Padre itself was a fantastic story. We have this tape of Padre, and taken the day before, he dropped the body. He dropped the body while he's dictating a letter, and the last cordially yours or whatever just fell over. The Baba just took him like that. And so suffering is necessary to crack the hull of the ego. When you have a coconut and you want to eat the coconut, you have to crack that nut and get to the sweet part of the nut. And that's what we are to Baba. In fact, that's what they do in India. They symbolically bring a coconut to the feet of the master, symbolizing the surrender of the ego. Baba has to crack your ego, that's all. Like Jean Angel said when she left the ashram, Baba, thank you for the wonderful time with you. This is Master Ashram. And Baba said, thank me only for the suffering. Why? Because the suffering matures you. People who haven't suffered are not mature. You know? And I remember so well in New York, Adele and I would stand at the door to take names and addresses to put people on our mailing list. So this very well-dressed, very handsome woman, lovely, charming lady, I went up to her and asked for her name, and she said, no, dear. She said, I don't need Bob. I have everything. I have a wonderful husband. I have wonderful children. I have everything I want. And I don't need Baba. And I felt so sorry for her. Because she had she had everything at that moment in her life. I don't know what later. But, you know, nothing was bringing her to Baba. No need. You know, what is that thing? Man's desperation is God's inspiration or something. Most of us have come for help, and that's how we find Baba, in our desperation. Whether it's an inward dryness, you haven't found the meaning of life, or maybe some desperate outer situation, like people come to Baba's feet just in a desperate karmic position. I know this story of this very beautiful girl who seemed to have everything. She was rich, she was good looking, all that. She comes to Baba and says she wanted to commit suicide. So Baba said, all right, do it right here, now. Put your head on my feet. And he pushes her down. And a moment passes. And Baba says, now, you're in a new life. You see. Whatever drives a beautiful, rich girl to Baba's feet was sad stories. I think it was men or something. That's another whole lecture. But, you see, desperation brought her to Baba's feet. And that's the story of everyone's heart, that you're driven, you're actually, nature, the force of karma drives you to God. There's, you know, it's like a cattle drive. You can't get out of it. You're headed for the marketplace. You see those cowboys, you know. And, no, you're unwilling. But you think back, I think it was Plato in his famous discourses too, someone said that, well, you know, man is destined for happiness and everything, so, you know, why should we suffer? And Plato, Socrates really says, well, a pig is happy. Do you want to be a pig? and that's true. Supposing that little primordial slime was real happy, wouldn't have crawled out? Wouldn't have evolved. The caveman and shivering in his cave, would he ever invented fire? You know, he had to, you know, all those negativities drive you on. And I have to say that's the lesson that I've had with Baba. I too have to reach the point now at advanced years. Say, it's the suffering Baba gave me that I didn't like any more than anybody else, but it it did mature me a teeny bit. And I'm grateful for it. I wasn't always grateful at the time. I had this inestimable privilege in '52. On May 10th, I met Baba, and the second day, May 11th, the few of us that were there were given the privilege to have an interview with Baba absolutely alone. No Mandali even there. And that was just too overwhelming. So I sat there, and Baba had the board, and he was slowly spelling out, "Do you have any questions?" And I really at that point, my mind was just so overwhelmed with Baba that I shook my head. So then he spelled slowly, "Those who ask for nothing get everything." So that was very fantastic. But then Baba knew there were questions, rolling around in here. And they came up non-verbally. I asked Baba, why did I go through that period of intense suffering? And Baba reached out, and he took this left arm, which is kind of interesting. He held my wrist like this. And at that moment, I felt like his blood coming up through me, down into my heart, piercing me like with the suffering of Christ. And that's the answer. You can't complain about your suffering if you really feel the suffering of Baba, the Christ. And he would say that, on his alphabet board at different times. He would say like this, he says, "I am the Christ, undoubtedly, and I suffer infinitely every moment for you all, but my infinite bliss sustains me." And I always think of that, right across. And he would get at times this very intense look of suffering, like one of those Spanish carved Christs, that looked so agonized. And then suddenly he would be happy looking. But you just have to see one moment of that glimpse of Baba to realize, just to know that he does suffer all the time. And the physical suffering, that the avatar has to go through is so minimal, even though it's terrible, because the mental suffering is constant and incredible, the weight of the whole universe. His universal mind experiences the suffering of every mind in creation, and every mind in creation is bound, and it's the bindings that are creating suffering. So he must suffer constantly. And that's why I said the other day, you feel around Baba, you don't want to throw any more, to add to that weight, but of course you do. And here was another incredible moment with Baba. I saw him for the first time after the accident. His nose had been changed, and the jaw had been hurt, and all that. And yet he was in his wheelchair, and he looked at me, and he beamed, and he said, "America was after my blood for a long, long time." And he was happy. And Delia said the same thing in the accident. She came up to him, Baba was still lying on the ground in a pool of his blood, and his face all bloody and everything. And looked down into his eyes, and she said they were just blazing stars of happiness. So the avatar has, he has the positive and the negative of his own fantastic acceptance of suffering. And there's that whole idea of atonement that we, Christians and Jews too, because they have the Day of Atonement and so on, Baba said, most of us suffer for our own karma. A few saints take on the suffering of others. The perfect masters and the perfect masters take on the suffering of humanity, but the avatar suffers for the whole creation. And many times we were with Baba, and this happened the first day I was with him, and he said, "While I'm sitting here with you, I am working all over the universe." So you get a tiny, tiny feeling of Baba working all over the universe. And so many times he'd say, he was doing his universal work. You can see in the films, which I know we're just going to see more films, and he goes like this, that was the sign that he's doing the universal work, whatever it is, but it's for the liberation of the whole creation. In fact, he told MeherBabaLibrary that when he broke his silence, the whole creation for 7 minutes would experience his divinity. So that's still ahead of us. I just hope I'm not on the freeway, but... And especially in the new life, you see, we have the ups and downs more intensified, the opposites of Maya. Now, if you're an artist or a photographer, you know that you cannot paint a picture all white or all black. Although some of these New Age painters I once went to an exhibit at Pasadena. I think it's Ad Reinhardt or something, I forget. All black canvases. Huge hunks of black canvas. With one white dot over there. Very depressing. I said, let's get out of here. Because when you paint your sanskaras. When you paint Baba with your sanskaras on the face. Very interesting, isn't it? Even when you take pictures of Baba, somehow the pictures you take are Baba to you. Brings up a funny incident. It really isn't related exactly to this, but Baba had said in 56, I'm sorry, no professional photography. And he stuck to that to the end of his days, except for that crazy Gastrin. Or is he? Van Gastrin in his film. Only amateurs. But we had a Baba lover of that same name, Tony Bruceberry, who was very well known in those days. She invented modern fashion photography. And she was clicking pictures of Baba. And I had my little brownie camera, and really just nothing, And there was Baba seated in his car and walking around, and she'd be going like this, She said, I know Baba didn't want me to take pictures, but I'm going to try. So I said, well, if you get any pictures, let me have some copies. Every roll of hers came out blank. She hadn't obeyed Baba. But I got my nice little fuzzy box camera pictures of Baba. I don't know, it struck me as a positive and negative. It was Ramakrishna who said when the God incarnation comes, and Baba has said similar things as Krishna, and he said it was Baba and all that, that the ocean fills up all the little creeks and rivulets, and they get full. You see, like the tidal wave that comes in from the ocean. The ocean has a huge wave in it now, so all the little creeks and small rivers fill up too. And Ramakrishna was saying this in regard to the same thing, that the hearts are filled up more with grace, of course, when the incarnation is here, the manifestation is here. And also, I feel that's true in those religions that venerate the past avatars. Like today, we are following Baba directly. We're following the fresh oatmeal, Erich's story about the oatmeal. But other people are taking a tremendous interest now in Christianity more. There's a whole revival, there's charismatic Christianity, there's more feeling for Jesus, even if it's Jesus freaks, at least they're concentrating more. And there's a lot of love being generated. And there's a tremendous revival of interest in Buddhism. And the Hare Krishnas and people like that, or the yogi, people interested in half the yoga of the East, the mysticism of the East, Zen meditation. All these are kind of getting a revival, like a backwash from the presence of the Avatar. It stimulates even the old oatmeal, the old religions. Yeah. Well, you know Erich's story, I'm sure. I'll tell it briefly. Someone asked, why we should follow the avatar today when we have Christ, maybe somebody, very devoted to Jesus. And he says, well, if you have a new baby, and you want to buy it food, and you go in the store, and the shopkeeper shows you a row of cans of oatmeal, and said, this one's 20 years old, and this one's 15 years old, and this one is, made today, which one will you choose? You choose the fresh oatmeal, because it has more life to it, more power, really, if you want to use that word. So, and that's the same with the name of God. People recite Ram, or Jesus, the prayer of Jesus, or Allah, or the Jews, the Spirit of God. And they're names for God, but the name of Baba has more power because it's the latest name for God. You see. And Baba said, I tell you with my divine authority that so great is my position that if anyone, anywhere, any of my devotees calls upon me, I have to respond. And that's a very wonderful, comforting thought. And there are some wonderful stories about Baba having responded, and people saying his name, taking his name, and having their life saved, I know one boy in the Berkeley group, I don't know who he was on a motorcycle, and speeding down toward him was this huge Mack truck, with about 5 feet away, head on. I don't know. And he shouted Baba's name. And the next thing he knew, he was standing upright on the side of the road, and his motorcycle was totally demolished. Baba just lifted him. And I had a weird experience I never could explain. I used to, because of my hip, always ride the first seat in the bus in New York. And bus drivers are weird, and New York traffic is pretty crazy. The bus driver and a taxi cab driver got into a fight. And all the way down Lexington, they were fighting with each other. And the bus driver wasn't looking where he was going. But I was right up front, and I saw this man step right in front of the bus. And he didn't put on the brakes. If I am happy, think that Baba wants me to be happy. And if I am in difficulties, think that Baba wants me to be in difficulties. Some people get real mad when they have difficulties. They get angry at Baba, they shout at Baba. They even can turn away from Baba. I know one woman who was coming to our meetings a lot for many years in New York. And then for a while, then we never saw her anymore at all. But I happened to meet her here on the West Coast many years later. Very sweet woman. And I said, what happened? We missed you. She said, well, I went through such intense suffering after a certain period, and I just couldn't understand why Baba would do that to me. God is good, and how could he do this? This is a real problem for many people out in the world. That's why many people are atheists or negative, whatever pop word there is, despondent, black humor people. How could this happen to me? People went through the Holocaust, incredible suffering, or are going through similar things. How could God let this happen? You see. And she in miniature too said, how could Baba do this to me? She hadn't absorbed why the suffering was there and what the lesson was. And it was interesting because her background was in religious science, which is sort of like Christian Science, where everything always has to be good or else you didn't pray right, And that can be pretty difficult because everyone has their karma. You can have bad karma coming from, 5,000 years ago. What are you going to do about it? You can't exactly pray it away. In fact, in Hindu theology, they have, I don't know these Hindu words, but there are 3 kinds of karma. The kind you can't change, the kind that you can only change a little bit, and the kind that you can change completely. You see, if you're tied to the railroad track and the train is coming, that's the kind of karma you cannot change. It's going to hit you. Again on the freeway. And Then there's the kind that you could change. You can do something about. And then there's the kind that you can radically change, which is more or less in the future. And of course, Baba's given us real hints about how to change karma. It's another talk, number 3. But he says we must be prepared for every kind of disappointment and adversity. This was a message in the New Life. Helpless and hopeless. Why should we be helpless and hopeless? What good is that? It makes you depressed and, everything taken away, this thing, the ruin. But see, again, it's like stripping the coconut down just to the sweet milk. And it has to be done. But again, I say you have to understand it. Otherwise, you might go into a mental state of, really serious depression or mental illness, or do crazy things, or beat up on other people, or, do all these things. You pass on the negativity. And that's why it's important to adjust that negativity in yourself. And to go back to my favorite subject, the Jungians say that you have to take that shadow side of yourself, which is writing the negative script all the time. Because what happens to you is your karma. Nobody else is writing this negative script. You want to say people are mean to you, reject you, beat up on you, life is mean. It's you. You wrote that script, and you keep on writing it until you balance the positive and negative in yourself, at least to some extent. And in their language, they say you make friends with your shadow. In fact, there's a great book called Make Friends with Your Shadow. Otherwise, you're constantly throwing that negativity out onto the outward part that's not you. You throw it out of the boundary of the self, and it comes back to you, and you think, oh, that guy's mean to me, or that person rejected me, or that person's thoughtless, or that boss is stupid and hurting me, and that bank won't cash my check. That happened to me recently. My checkbook was so bad I had to call Christy to balance my checkbook. But you see, the point is that you're throwing out the negativity outside of yourself. And so it comes back to you as part of what happens to you. And so the psychology is to find out the negativity in yourself and work on it there before you write the script. Like if you're a playwright, of course, to make a drama, you have to have trouble, right? Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy finds girl and kisses horse or something, I don't know. But the point is that you have to have something happen if you're a dramatist. But if you're writing the script, you want to kind of lessen the trouble. And in all these, stories, these great mythical stories in humanity, the legend of King Arthur or Romeo and Juliet or any of these great myths, the hero, the divine hero's journey, he starts out, he doesn't know very much, and this isn't fairy tales, so it's always the fool, a third brother. I always wonder why it's the third one, or the youngest daughter or something. And gets a little help from magical rabbits and witches and stuff to face the journey with. But then comes the problem, which is an ogre or a dragon or something, or the belly of the whale, Job's boils. The boils are very nice, and a few other things. And then you conquer the negativity. They're all dramas, myths of facing the negativity that is in you. It comes there out as a dragon or a bad boss. I had a dragon as a boss. That's another whole story. But I deserved the dragon as a boss because although he was totally mean to me, this was at Mattel, for a year and a half, every morning he'd come in. He couldn't really fault my work, but he wasn't feeling good about himself, obviously. He'd sit me down in the bullpen, glass walls, everybody watching. You this and you that and you are stupid and everything. He never tackled my partner in games because he was a man. It was a woman, obviously, something wrong. with him. But I had to suffer this for a long time. And it was really getting to me. My health was beginning to suffer. So I lay down in my bed one night. I was coming home, tears, ridiculous. This man was making me feel so bad. And I saw into the past. 5,000 years ago. 5,000 years ago in Egypt. He had been my slave, and I really had beat up on him, literally. So now he was beating up on me with his tongue, And then I finally thought, no, I can't handle this anymore. I can't leave the job. I complained to everybody. They said, no, he's a buddy of the boss. You can't do anything with him. And so I suddenly remembered Dr. Duncan in the war had been assigned as a medico in the army in India, but he got some terrible top sergeant. And he wrote to Baba, and immediately the sergeant was transferred. So I thought, right idea. And I had never asked Baba for anything. But suddenly I thought, this is too much. So I wrote just a postcard to Baba, actually to Mani, because we weren't allowed to write. And in 5 days, Jurgis will back me up, in 5 or 6 days, this man was totally removed. They went to New York and hired a new boss for me. Baba never answered the letter, but... So what I had incurred that karma, and I had to work it out. And, I'd done my bit, I think, and then Baba helped. And this is, Baba said, I don't interfere with your karma. But through my grace, I'm using my own words, but basically this is the thought he said many times. I help you to go through what your karma is. And, some of the disciples, again, Margaret and Kitty and those said, how Baba ameliorated the karma of people. He didn't take it away, but he softened the blow, so to speak. And sometimes very dramatically so. But like when he would be criticizing someone who wasn't there, he was really working on their karma and saving their lives, basically. Sometimes he'd be saying, oh, such and such is a so-and-so, and then you find out later that person was going through a very dangerous situation, like those dancers who tried to get to Baba in 52, and it was, again, terrible weather, and they almost could have crashed any minute. And Baba was very angry. He called Margaret in and Dick Lauer and said, what kind of people are you bringing me? They're supposed to be here in the morning, and this and that all day long. And she was looking very solemn. But he was bringing them through this storm and danger, you see. They had to go through the storm, the fright, the danger. But with Baba's help, they didn't crash or whatever. So you do have to go through the negative karma, but Baba does help you. And hopefully you have the brains to realize why you have to go through it. Just even as a test of your faith. Again, I bring up the freeway. I have to drive with people. I don't drive. And some of these people freak me out. I was driving to work every day with a Hungarian, a mad Hungarian, who had learned to drive when he first came to this country in 56 from a man at work who was a definite, what he calls people who don't believe in any laws. Anarchist. He was a real anarchist. He didn't believe in traffic laws. Red lights, go right through them. Right hand turns, left hand. Everything, no rule at all. And this poor Paul had learned to drive with him. And he was living next door to me, so I had to drive with him. So every morning, Paul would say, we'd cross this terrible intersection at Rosecrans. Instead of taking the normal road and waiting for the red light, he would say, now Phyllis, put your hand out, stop the traffic, we're going to go across it. So he could get on the corner each. So here, 4-lane traffic coming at terrific speed, and I just held out my hand to stop them while Paul... And every morning I go, Meher Baba, Meher Baba, Meher Baba, Meher Baba, Meher Baba. He scared the blank out of me. It was terrible. And so, sometimes this negative side, it is a basic test of your faith in Baba. And it also is a big ego crusher. You know, there's certain people in the Baba world who were puffing up like, you know, the fairy tale of frog, but and everyone was fed up with them, you know. Baba didn't say your ego's blowing up and you're behaving like a whatever nice polite word. My language is not fit for this. And suddenly they'd get sick, totally out of commission. You know? And that's an ego pressure, and I've been through that. You know, I probably was too bloated up, and all of a sudden Baba knocks me out. You know, I have to lie in bed, I miss the sahas, I have to creep around on a cane, and I get to India and I bust my foot, and, you know, all the things you wanted, you know, no, you have to be this helpless nut lying there and dependent on other people. And so it's a big loss of position. You're not independent, and you have to realize that you're helpless. And that things like that in the ashram many times, people would criticize Baba. Why didn't he heal X, Y, and Z disciples and stuff? But the illness, just one small way to crush, or traveling, all the inconveniences of traveling, is, again, like I said last night, we're on the journey, and those difficulties you have to face with equipoise, with poise, with cheerfulness. And so the negative karma is useful, but nobody likes that. It's very unpopular. Usually when I talk about it, people leave, but I guess you're okay. That the suffering is necessary. But I would always hang on to that great suffering means great liberation. Okay, Bob, I'm ready. Take me through it quickly. You know, it's the same thing you face in a medical thing. The doctor tells you, we have surgery, get rid of it now, or we can give you shots and drag it out, you know. You have to make some decision of what do you want? You want it all over quick, or do you want it dragged out? And so that's what Bob is saying. You want your karma all one big lump? Like well, you know, when I was a child of about 10, one Christmas morning, I got a sock full of black coal. I don't think at this point it was very cool of my parents to do it. But that meant I was a naughty girl. I'd been bad, you see. And I thought about that. And I thought about it, and I thought about it. And only now when I'm older I forgive my parents. But, you know, it was a negative touch, but it did kind of do me some good, because then I started to rely more on myself instead of, you know, all these little kicks to push you forward toward a search for truth. And when I went to college, my health broke down. I had to leave my own group and class, and got thrown around and completely off track at college, and kind of had a miserable time with it. And but that being miserable during my teens, then I really had to go inward, and it pushed me much faster, because in those days, at least, if I hadn't worked real hard to search for truth inwardly and start reading books on philosophy and looking for wisdom, I wouldn't have been ready at 25 to hear Baba. So you would all have a chance, you know. There's all sorts of information about Baba, and books and other groups and gurus, anything to get you started much younger, and especially Baba worked on you. That's a very special generation. But I had to push real hard. I had to put away a lot of stuff that you don't have to deal with now, a lot of bad theology, a lot of bad psychology. Really, you know, an age that was very atheistic and very negative, very political. Second World War, everyone was worrying about communism and all that junk. I pushed that all aside and searched for God, but if I hadn't really suffered and wanted to know what the heck was going on, I wouldn't have made it. So I do bless all that nasty teenage stuff I had to go through. And that's a kick in the kiss. Baba kicked, what is that awful hymn? Kick me, Jesus, through the goalpost of life. Rob kicked me through the... Yes, so do not let go of the hand of truth, and smile while you're hanging on to that subway strap, hand of truth in the subway of life. No, that's a terrible allegory. As an ex-New Yorker. And so I'm going to throw you some kisses. I'll let Baba give you the kick. So, Jai Baba.